For some background, I am not your typical repo man by looking at me. Most guys I work with are over 6'3", 200 to 300 pounds, bald with a beard. I know it sounds specific, but it really holds true in my experience. I, on the other hand, am 5'11", 155 pounds, but I do have a beard. I was out working during the day and checking a retail location for a vehicle I'd been searching for. The address I was checking was located in a large mall area. I glanced in my rearview mirror to see a red Ford Focus behind me. He made a few of the same turns I did, but I didn't think twice about it. After the 7th or 8th turn that he mimicked, I decided to pull into a parking spot. I figured he would either move on or come talk to me, if that was his goal. I noticed he was on the phone in my rear view. I parked the truck and watched the car as it parked about 50 feet from me. Okay, fine. I noticed the man driving the Focus was staring and pointing at me as he spoke on the phone, so I decided to ask what his deal was. When I approached, he got out of his vehicle, which was alarming, so I backed off and didn't get closer. I leaned my head out my open window and said, "Sir, is there a reason you're following me?" He moves his phone from his ear, covering the microphone, and yells, "Yeah, you're harassing people on private property. Cops are on their way." I told him that was fine, and I would wait around to speak to the police. He yelled some more unintelligible nonsense as I put my window up and sat pretty, waiting for the police. A few minutes later, a cruiser shows up behind me. The officer approached my window and we spoke about the situation. I told him that I'm permitted on private property unless I'm explicitly asked to leave by someone who owns the property or works security, which he agreed with. Long story short, the police told me I was good to go and asked that I not engage this man as I left. I complied and planned to move on with my day. About 20 minutes after all of this, I glanced in my rearview to see the same Ford Focus driving a couple of cars behind me. So I parked again, out of frustration. I immediately exited my truck and lit a cigarette. The man driving this car screeched up beside me and exited his car without putting it in park, rather putting it in neutral. As his car begins to roll away, he is turned away from it, screaming at me about violating his right to privacy and harassing the public at this mall. I calmly told him that I was already cleared by the police department and that I was losing patience. I told him he needed to leave right then before I called the police. It was at this point that his vehicle struck the concrete base of a light pole and stopped. He started screaming and saying I crashed his car. I told him I had a dash cam and the footage would completely negate that claim. That's when he charged me. Now remember, I'm not a big guy, but I've dealt with plenty of confrontation at this job, and this guy did not appear coordinated at all. I stepped out of his path and guided him to the ground, telling him to stay down while I leave and to leave me alone. I got in my truck and left. Looking back, I absolutely should have called the police again, as I've gotten the officer's cell phone number and badge number. This story all comes to a head 2 nights later in a bizarre turn of events that genuinely scared me. At the time, I had just gotten married to my lovely wife, and we were living in our little 1-bedroom in our hip little suburb of a major Midwest city. It was a Friday night, and I decided I would go grab some beers for the wife and I to enjoy after a long week. As I was leaving the store with our booze, I saw a maroon Ford Focus in the parking lot, seemingly unoccupied. I made a mental note of the coincidence given the bizarre ordeal a couple of days prior, but didn't think much more of it. As I pulled into my apartment's parking lot, the Focus pulled in behind me. I hadn't noticed it following me up until this point. I live on the 3rd floor, so I decided I was going to hustle up the steps just in case this was the same guy, and he'd stalked me or something in order to exact his revenge for whatever perceived transgression I'd bothered him with. My plan didn't work. He followed me to my patio where my wife was waiting, again unbeknownst to me. I was apparently not feeling very observant that night, I suppose. And that's when this man snuck up, crouching behind our small fence. Neither of us knew he was there until he said, still hidden from view, "Pretty girl." I snapped to my feet and began to look around when I spotted him. I knew instantly it was him. I immediately ordered my wife to go inside, lock the door, and call the police. When I approached him, he drew a small switchblade and pointed it at my belly. I began to back up with my hands up, saying something along the lines of, "We don't have to do this. What do you want?" He told me he wanted me to call my wife back outside, but that wasn't going to happen. I'd rather be stabbed than expose her to this man, so I told him as much. He lunged at me with a knife, grazing and cutting my side as I attempted to grab and redirect his forearm. Then we went to the ground, where he lost his knife. I got some knees to connect to his head when the police lights became visible and I heard shouting. Long story short, Buddy was arrested, and I provided the badge number and PD of the officer from work a couple of days prior in order to corroborate my claims. I decided to press charges, and as far as I know, he's awaiting a court date. I'm sure I'll have to be involved in it. For 6 months, I lived in the north of Spain. About a week before I was going to move back to Ireland, my friend and I were at my house having dinner and drinking a little. I was renting an apartment in the city, and my roommate was an older lady, maybe in her 50s. I'm 20. That night, my roommate left to go have dinner with her friends. About a minute after she left, someone buzzed our door to be let into the building. I looked at the camera and didn't recognize the woman. She looked to be in her late 20s to early 30s, so I just assumed it was one of my roommate's friends, and she was coming to meet her or something like that. I buzzed her into the building, assuming that they would meet in the lobby. At first I didn't buzz her in because I didn't recognize her, and she walked away from the door. But then I hit the buzzer as soon as she walked away, and then I, myself, walked away from the camera, meaning I couldn't see if she actually entered or not, assuming that if she didn't enter, she would just call or text my roommate. And boy, was I wrong. This woman came up to my apartment building on the 6th floor. She came up just 2 minutes after my roommate left, so I know she didn't take the stairs, and I know they must have seen each other when my roommate got off the lift and the lady got in. Realizing that this is weird, I don't open the door when she rings it. I look through the people just to confirm that it was nobody I knew. At this point, I back away from the door and gesture for my friend to be silent. We creep back to my room, which is at the far side of the apartment, and I begin calling my roommate who isn't picking up. Meanwhile, the lady is incessantly ringing my door. My roommate is not picking up, and my friend is just telling me to open my door. In her mind, it's a woman, so she must be harmless. I tell her she's an idiot for underestimating females. Women can be criminals too. She keeps telling me to open the door, and I refuse. The door keeps ringing. I keep looking at the peephole. At this point, I understand that if she knew my roommate or was looking for someone specific, she would just call or text them. She didn't take out a phone at all. She just stayed eerily silent, didn't call out any names or ask if anyone was home. This was weird to me. I finally get through to my roommate. She says she wasn't expecting anyone and that she doesn't know anyone in that age range. She asks if I'm okay, and I say I'm fine. Now it's been at least 20 minutes. I know the lady knows someone is home because the lights are on, and my understanding is that's why she's not leaving. I continue watching her through the peephole and see her go into the lift for a minute and then come back out again. The lift is really loud, and I would have heard it move. It didn't. She just went in and came out. In my mind, this means someone is in the lift waiting for her, and this screams sketchy to me. After about 40 minutes, she leaves. I run to our hall and flick on the outside camera. The lady left the building with 2 men. They all had backpacks on. I will be eternally grateful for trusting my instincts and not listening to my friend. Sometimes, it's better to be safe than sorry. It happened about a month after I had started my first job at a grocery store. My main job was to be a cashier, however, I was often told to restock, clean, make some back runs, and things like that. Likely I had been canceling my day shifts as I was a senior in school and had lots of assessments to do, so the manager decided to put me up for night shifts. Now, since I was the oldest teenage cashier there, they would often put me up for closing shift along with about 3 others who were all aged well above 20. I was fine with this, as the store was much quieter at night and it was really relaxing, honestly. However, one night changed the whole opinion on that. It was a Sunday, and I had started my shift at about 5 p.m., with my finishing time set at 10 p.m. Between 5 and 6, we had a big rush of sudden customers, so I was flogged with customer after customer. I was the only employee minding the registers and was placed at the end of the store near the cold produce. Most of the customers were in a general rush and barely looked at me. The last customer, however, did the complete opposite. He had brown eyes and dirty blonde hair and was pretty tall and lean-looking. Earlier, I had noticed him down the aisle, right next to me, staring at me as I served another customer. I suppose he thought I wouldn't notice him out of the corner of my eye. I wrote it off as him maybe having some kind of anxiety disorder or something. When he came up to the register, I repeated the same sentence I had to say to every customer. "Hello, how are you tonight? Would you like a bag?" Most people would answer the question, but no, not him. Instead, he smiled at me weirdly and replied, "You have such a soft voice." This embarrassed me, as I was often told I talked too quietly and people couldn't hear me. So I smiled awkwardly, apologized, and asked again if he wanted a bag. He nodded, and I turned around, bent down, and reached for my last bag, which was stuffed right at the back of the tiny little holder thing by the register. When I turned back around, the man was leaning slightly over the counter with his chest pointed downwards, as if he was looking for something. I paused as we both made eye contact, his smile now slightly faded. I asked him if he had dropped something very harshly, as I was pretty certain I knew what he was trying to see, and he shook his head quietly, taking a step back from the register. I finished serving him and watched him leave before telling my team manager what had happened. He listened silently and told me he was a usual customer and was probably just a weirdo. After that, I sort of pushed the memory aside, as I had a lot to do still. Once I had finished my shift and helped turn off all the register lights and clean up, I checked out in the employee room, grabbed my bag, and made my way back to the back exit that led into the back alley. I hated leaving this way alone, as it was pretty creepy, but my coworkers had asked me if it was okay if they were to leave and leave the last of the cleaning to me. So I agreed, eager to make a good impression on them. Thus, I was the last person to leave, other than the Night Stalkers. I walked down the alley for a bit before slowing when I noticed a man smoking near a back door to one of the other stores. I was raised to be wary but also not afraid, so I continued to walk while staring at him. As I got closer, I identified the man as the same man who had acted strangely earlier. With no other way to go, I decided to just walk past as fast as I could, as the alley would lead to the street any time now anyways. As I walked past him, he lifted his head and smiled at me once again. I didn't smile back. Now past him, I quickened my pace, and with good reason. The man had begun to follow me. On one occasion, I glanced back at him to be met with another smile and a wink. Too afraid to run, I decided to pick up my phone and pretend to be calling someone, hoping it would turn him off, but it didn't. The man continued to follow me, and I started to panic. I contemplated calling the police, but concluded that if he had heard me, he would immediately attack me and I'd be done, or worse, before they even arrived. To my luck, however, as I rounded the next corner, I spotted 2 men that had just finished their shift at our neighboring grocer. Once I was near them, I stopped, turned around, and confronted the man. I told him that if he didn't go away, I would call the police, and then I told my coworkers all about him. This grabbed his attention of the other 2 men, who started to walk towards me and the man. And the man stopped as he had noticed the other 2 men, and his smile quickly faded again. He turned around without a word and stalked back down the alley as the men began asking me if I was all right. After a short explanation and a lift home, I decided to call my manager the next day and report it. And needless to say, that man is now on our banned list. So I've been working at Wendy's, a popular fast food chain in the US, for a few months now. And while I've had the occasional offhanded comment of, "Wow, you're so beautiful. Do you have a boyfriend? He must be a lucky guy. When are you off? I'd love to take you out." I've never had something like this happen before. So there I was, an hour before my shift was over. I work as a cashier, and the majority of people who come in are old people and construction workers. I have my back turned to the dining room, and I'm putting liners on trays when I hear someone loudly clear their throat. I turn around and apologize and tell them I'm ready to take their order whenever they are ready. The customer is a heavier set man, in his 50s or 60s, whose shirt appears to be covered in either grease stains or sweat. I also noticed the smell of cigarettes was strongly wafting off him, but that kind of thing never really bothered me. Then the conversation goes like this. "Hi there, darling. How's your day going?" "It's going well. Ready to be finished with the workday." "Oh, what time are you off?" "I'm a bit uncomfortable with answering that. Can I get you something?" Well, it's just an innocent question. I'm not a creep. Although you are very naturally beautiful, I'm sure you get a lot of weirdos in here. It's refreshing to see a girl your age not wearing any makeup. Are you Spanish? I can tell because of your name." I have a very common Spanish last name, and I am, but I look like a white girl with dark hair. Now me, very obviously uncomfortable. Yeah, I'm half Mexican." "On your mom or dad's side?" At this point, my shift manager comes over because she can see I'm clearly uncomfortable, and there's a line of a few people now behind him. When he sees her walk over, he says, "Uh-oh, you're in trouble." She hears this and asks him if everything's okay, and he says, "Sure, just making conversation. Is that against the rules or something?" And she responds, "No, sir, but you're holding up the line and haven't ordered anything." He makes a face like he's annoyed and orders a small iced tea, pays in change, and the whole time he's just staring intensely at me. It makes me so uncomfortable I start to get red in the face. I continue taking orders while he just sits there staring. Eventually, I tell my manager he's making me uncomfortable and asks if I can go wash trays in the back or do drive-thru for the rest of my shift. She says no and reminds me I have to clean the dining room before I leave. I start to walk away, and she says, "He's probably just a lonely old man, and it's not against the law to stare." This makes me really anxious and annoyed, but I need this job, so I just go grab a rag and start cleaning tables. I try to keep my distance from the man who's sitting in the right corner when he says, "Excuse me, little miss. My table isn't clean." Trying to use my best customer service voice, I say, "You're welcome to switch to a clean one, and I'll wipe that one off." He insists he doesn't have to move, and even has the balls to say, "Should I go get the manager?" If you've ever worked in retail or food service, you know that's the last thing you want to happen, especially if your manager is terrible like mine. So he lifts up his tray and sneers at me while I wipe it from the opposite side and try to stay as far away as possible. He also asks me to go grab him a straw, which is not at all my job, but of course I do it anyway. When I come back and set it on his table, he says something that makes my stomach drop. "What's an old man like me gotta do to get you to say yes to a date?" I know this isn't just an anxiety thing, but when I start to have a panic attack, I literally can't talk. I get red and hot all over, especially my face, and I shake bad. I could feel it coming, so I just walked away. I went in and told my shift manager that he was being really pushy and that I can't go back out there. She told me I can just leave early. I think she could tell I was near tears. Plus, I had only 20 minutes of my shift, and the person taking over was there early. I'm 19, and the whole reason I got this job was to save up for a car. My house is a little less than a mile away, and I don't usually mind walking, but today, for obvious reasons, I didn't feel comfortable doing that. I tried calling my boyfriend for a ride because I knew he was off that day, but he was at lunch with his younger sister, and so I downplayed the situation to avoid making him leave like my needy self. I walk on, and surprise, surprise, the man is still there. As soon as I walk out, he walks out too. I decide to completely ignore him and begin making my way to the crosswalk next to my work, headphones in. It isn't until he blocks my way that I see he's still trying to talk to me. "Need a ride, sweetheart? It's awfully hot out here," he says with a wink that makes my skin crawl. I walk around him and ignore him, pushing the button to cross. He makes this face of horror, like he can't believe I just refuse his offer after clearly showing I'm uninterested. I put my headphones in and blast the volume, but I can see his mouth moving like he's cursing me out, and turns around and gets back in his car. I keep pushing the button as if that will somehow make the walk sign appear faster, desperate to get home and lock the door behind me. When it does, I start to walk without even realizing his car was at the crosswalk, and he quickly speeds up, narrowly missing me, and the shock made me fall back on my butt. He speeds off, and I ran across and hit on the small bike trail for 15 minutes before running home and locking the door behind me. I just called the actual manager, different from the shift manager, basically the big boss, and she was much more understanding. She told me that I'm allowed to have someone take my place if he comes in again, and also let all my coworkers know not to give him any info about my shifts. I used to live in a university apartment complex while my parents were studying. This complex had a hill that it was on top of. It was steep enough for kids to take sleds and sled down the hill during the wintertime. At the bottom of this hill there was a small patch of woods. This forest contained a drain to prevent flooding, so back in elementary school, I was hanging out with my friend Daniel during summer break. Daniel was also 2 years older than me. We were over at my apartment playing Mario Kart. Then, my mom came in and suggested that we go outside and get some fresh air. My parents were relatively lenient and allowed us to go anywhere as long as it was in the complex. Unfortunately, Daniel and we pushed this rule today. We went outside and went down to the woods to do some exploring. We began by looking for turtles, snakes, and frogs. We couldn't find anything, so Daniel suggested to go through the flood drain and see if there was anything on the other side. The tunnel was dry since it had not rained in ages, so I was okay with it. I had been to the other side before and just led to a creek, and it was rather nice and secluded. So today we went through the tunnel like usual, and when we came out, there was a group of 4 sketchy-looking high school boys smoking. They saw us, and being a 3rd grader, I got nervous, so I will briefly describe them to make it easier to differentiate between the 4. One boy was chubby, one skinny, one was holding a speaker, and one had long hair, and looked like a stereotypical surfer. I'll call them Fat Boy, Skinny, DJ, and Surfer Boy. Upon seeing us, they dropped their cigarettes and started heading over to us. Fat Boy asks, "What do you guys think you're doing back here?" I was still really nervous, so Daniel did all the talking. Daniel said we were just exploring and seeing what we could find. They all nodded, and DJ asked if we want to have a rap battle. I didn't want to, but before I could say anything, Daniel says yes, and our troubles begin. DJ finds a beat on his phone while Skinny Boy and Daniel prepare to battle, and this is where it begins to go wrong. At first, it is rather harmless. Skinny Boy was a decent rapper, and Daniel was absolutely awful. Now, I forgot to mention that Daniel was kind of racist and Fat Boy was black. At some point in Daniel's verse, he decides it's a good idea to include the N-word. Upon hearing this, Fat Boy calls out, "What did you just say?" Daniel now looks nervous and stutters that it just slipped out. I start grabbing Daniel and trying to leave through the tunnel when Skinny Boy grabs Daniel by the shirt collar and drags him closer to him. I begin to try to run away, like a little baby, to get my parents' help. DJ sees me trying to leave and pushes me hard, so I fall and eat it. After that, no one is focused on me, and they are all standing in a circle around Daniel. I continue running through the tunnel, out of the woods, up the hill, and into my apartment. I frantically burst inside and start tearing up and telling my parents that Daniel was in trouble with older boys. I was unable to articulate sentences because I was panicking, so it took 5 minutes for my parents to understand what was happening. After I finished telling them what had happened, my dad grabbed a baseball bat and went with me back through the tunnel. 15 minutes had passed at this point. My dad and I arrived to a horror scene. The 4 boys were all gone, and Daniel was lying in a bloody mess on the ground. He was knocked unconscious by the boys, and there was a tooth laying next to him. My dad quickly called 911 and attempted to explain the situation. I had to help out because my parents are foreign and struggle explaining things at times. After he explained what had happened, he told me to go up to the apartment and wait for help to arrive and lead them down to where Daniel was. We also called Daniel's parents to let them know what had happened. Luckily, we live in a relatively small town, so it took everyone around 10 minutes to arrive. I led everyone to the scene that had occurred behind the tunnel. When we got there, the paramedics got to work to get Daniel awake and treating his numerous injuries. Daniel barely regained consciousness eventually and was then led to the ambulance to be driven to the hospital with his parents. 2 police officers stayed behind with my parents and I to give us a lesson about being more strict and being careful in areas you think are safe. After everyone left, my parents did not even ground me because of the shock that I had just witnessed. After this, I never talked to Daniel again since his parents were so angry at my irresponsibility and my own parents' lack of care. He had also probably moved away since I had never seen him around at school. If anyone gets to this point in the story, I would ask for you to please be responsible, and if you are a parent, be strict on your child while they are young. They might not like a strict childhood growing up, but it is better to have a strict childhood than to have no childhood if it's prematurely ended by a tragedy. "2012 had a rocky start for me, to say the least, and had I have known at the time that I was going to be using my Junker project car to save my life from someone I had hardly known, but who had been in my life for almost 13 years, I might have spent less time reading about and working on 3D art, and more time out working on the car or my own fitness. I, however, felt that having finished high school single and spent the following 5 years on failed dates, maybe once a year, that there was absolutely no reason to think anyone would want me around or to bother me, as I was a monster just under 280 pounds. Rob and I had become acquainted through school as far back as elementary school, but I had never really gotten to know him, often helping him out with bullies and such simply because I couldn't stand watching. I wasn't popular. Pretty much everyone, including the outcasts, left me alone. Even Rob did till late middle school, and it wasn't hard to see why. I always looked about ready to hurt someone, and when I wasn't, it usually meant I had fallen asleep in class. After graduation, as far as I was concerned, everyone moved on with their lives and grew up. You know, got jobs or died young partying, as word came up from time to time through social media. Rob's parents had apparently moved to Australia for 3 years and left Rob with the house. His uncle moved in to help with upkeep on bills and such. Rob himself had developed schizophrenia at some point shortly after graduation, brought to light by the passing of his grandfather. I wish someone had been able to tell me any of the above before he tried to drag me down with him. I would run into him from time to time at the mall or Walmart to GameStop, just regular places that didn't seem odd at all. For me, talking to him was somewhat of a break from my fairly boring life. This was the way of a small town. Rob had become a big guy, well-balanced in weight and height compared to the majority of our school years. His self-esteem was still shot, and he would always ask if I wanted to go drinking, but as conversations went on, would also ask if he could help me out with anything. He always asked these 2 things if we talked, no matter how short the conversation was. I always declined. At first, I thought he had outwardly started acting bi or gay and had taken a liking to me, so I avoided him whenever I could. I was bad at getting a date, and I'm straight, so turning down a guy wasn't exactly in my mindset anywhere. Spring of 2012, I went to a car meet to show off my new prize. Rob was there, but something was wrong. This was 2 states away from home, and he didn't own a vehicle yet. Looking back, it seems odd just how I knew this was off so soon, and how my gut told me trouble was brewing. He didn't approach me, though. He did watch, giving glances on occasion from where we stood. Before the meet ended, I decided I'd say hello, at least to be polite and see what he was up to. In a voice that was clearly not his, almost as if his mind had been someone else altogether, he said,
"That was messed up, and it's not going to be the last mistake either, I bet."
My head fell to my right shoulder, and my eyes were locked in confusion. "What?" I just said hello.
"Hello,"
he mimicked in the same voice again. I turned away and brushed it off as him being childish. Maybe someone had already made him mad and he was just venting. Oh well, not a problem. The meet ends and I'm easily the third or fourth one out. Rob had been sitting in a passenger of some Dodge Charger and looked to be now watching the owner waiting tiredly to be taken home. Skip ahead a few weeks, another meet. I show up late after getting off of work late. I'm going to see a restored Ford Falcon that this guy on the forums I joined had been posting progress pics of. There's someone standing around the car. And that's not the owner, it's Rob, and he's looking dead on at me as I walk up. He waits till I'm walking by him around the front of the car and lightly open-handed pushes my shoulder to get me to look back at him. The second I do, that mocking voice from last time's comes from him again.
Mistakes.
I'm losing my nerve because the voice doesn't sound to be a threat, but when I ask him what his deal is, it seems like I suddenly stop existing again. There's a guy next to me now, Travis. I know him because of his truck. You just can't miss it, the paint job's so out there. Hey, he's out of his head, just ignore it. It's not the first strange thing he's said tonight. Travis seems to have caught the look on my face and is trying to help, I guess. The evening ends. Everyone leaves but me. I stick around to enjoy the night sky and cool breeze. I'm in an empty lot on a mountainside for at least another 40 minutes before I finally leave. There's the Falcon about 20 or so miles back down the road towards town. It's sitting on the shoulder blinkers on, and Rob and the owner are both leaned on the car looking entirely bummed out. It ran out of gas and they both just finished arguing about whose fault that was. I offer to give them a lift to go get gas. The owner instead hands me a canister from the trunk and some money, insisting that they both need to watch the car as no chances I'm letting anything happen to it. As I leave, I hear them get on each other's cases and could almost swear for the first time ever actually hearing legit anger in the otherwise depressed, normal voice of Rob. I return to them. The owner is sitting in the car's driver's seat in a huff. Rob quickly nabs the canister from me and waves me off in an almost disgusted fashion. Maybe I should have taken the hint that Rob's mocking and such were a mental issue, but for whatever reason, I keep thinking it was just some misplaced anger. "Guys, sure you won't need any more help?" I ask. The owner starts to speak, but is cut off when Rob whirls his heels from filling the tank, and in a rage-filled scream says,
"Always helpful, but never when needed, always a mistake. We don't need you."
I'm not about to fight with him or let him get any closer to me. Fighting Rob be about the dumbest thing I could do, as I was out of shape. He, on the other hand, was just a big guy, not muscular, but tough enough to take me out without a second thought. I wouldn't go to another car meet for a month. However, it'd be far from the last time I saw Rob. These next two visits would leave me helping him get home and the other running away from him with a dislocated shoulder. I had been out in town getting some supplies to build a new desk for my home office. On the way home, I had come across a gold Corolla sitting half off the road, its front end blown apart by an impact with a deer, and, never too far from predictable with my luck, Rob. He was down and clearly had been crying, sitting in front of his new totaled car holding his keys, mumbling about how bad his luck was. I didn't recognize him at first, and when he saw it was me, who had pulled up beside his car, his face turned from sad into a broken joy, clearly still broken but relieved. As he walked up to my window, the tow truck he had called showed up. He sternly asked for a lift home. After he directed me there, I dropped him off. The ride was silent aside from directions. He got out with a painful sigh and a thanks and went into a house where no lights were ever turned on, and I left. I had rented a small car garage to work in to be away from home so my family couldn't distract me from my work and so I could study my car as I was using it for a reference to a 3D model I was making. It had been 2 months since I had last seen Rob or gone to a car meet, and summer was having a fit of heat waves, so instead of sitting at the computer, I was under the car doing minor repairs like a brake job. The only people who should have had any idea where I was or what I was doing would have been my parents and the shop owner Tom. However, when a hand gripped around my forearm and yanked me from under the car where I had been trying to see to undo a caliper bolt, the last person I ever expected to see was Rob.
"It's your fault,"
he said loudly and angrily, face to face with me as I tried to jerk free and to get to my feet. In a moment, getting to my feet would be the least of my worries. Rob had hoisted me up to my feet and raised a clenched fist.
"They always have to tell me it's your fault."
He swung with his right fist, his left hand still firmly grasped to my forearm. Seeing his fist already as he swung, I jumped it, did little to help as the full blow went straight into my kneecap, and the force from me jumping caused him to stumble, sending both of us into the ground. I attempted to kick up to my feet, once more my right arm now held behind me in his grip from how he had fallen. Bad idea. I got up all right, but the force against his grip not only forced me back down, it also dislocated my shoulder. Pain. Pain was now screaming its way through my entire right arm, and I yelled out, which caused him to let go. He kicked me in the back as he got to his feet and reached for the jack nearby, swinging it on the ground at me as I rolled clean under the car and to the other side, getting to my feet.
"You're not. I can't. No, you'll make more mistakes, more trouble. Stop, stop, stop."
He yelled and rushed around the side of the car, blocking my attempt to run out to the open bay door. Rob had the wrench I was using in his hand now and was just standing there enraged, glaring at me. I wasn't some pro fighter, but I wasn't going to waste time being chased around the car either. No more thinking. I ran at him and jumped, tossing all of me into him. Being overweight paid off with its one and only benefit. My weight knocked him down again and sent me tumbling over him towards the bay door. I got up, busted out the door in a sprint as the wrench flew by me, clashing against the asphalt, and I heard Rob yelling and running after me, but he tripped. I glanced for only a moment and made my way to my project junker car. I got in and turned the key, turned it over. Rob had got up and was coming at me, bending to grab the wrench again as he did. I turned the wheel hard and floored it. Whomp. It hit him waist level, and I slammed on the brakes, watching him bash against the hood and fall back onto the pavement, this time staying down, groveling in pain. Kicking the door open to make room, I frantically started trying to reach my phone in my right pocket, with my left arm to call the cops, and to the best of my ability, started running towards the owner's home. The yelling had caught Tom's attention, and he had seen everything that had happened outside of the garage. He was already on the phone with the police, and after reaching me, stayed between where Rob laid and where I sat until they arrived. After a hospital visit and a very fun session of let the interns do it, the police stopped by and informed me that with Tom's statement and my injuries, it was clear what had happened. They also went on to tell me that Rob had recently been suspected of trying to attack another person, and had in fact beaten the Ford Falcon's owner the night I saw them. I have never seen Rob since then, and to the best of my knowledge, he is currently being held in a mental institution somewhere in Pennsylvania, close to the family he has left here in the United States. I don't think there's some lesson I can give here or an explanation outside of his mental condition. All I would like to say at the end of this is, fight no matter what, even if it seems a hopeless fight. (2008) Francis Scott Key Mall. I'll never forget the day my instincts saved my friend. I had gone to the mall with my childhood friend Sarah. We had actually been catching up. I never had many friends in school, and in high school, me and her never had the same classes, and life outside of school for me was mostly sleep. So this was as good a time as any for us to catch up. Sarah was petite, small, and skinny, but I'd never call her frail. I was a tall, heavy-set dude with a bad limp. She would often joke that she felt safer with me because I look like a big, scary bear, and the limp made me look like a hardcore mother who always won. She knew I hated being seen as scary, but would often tease, and the small walk be no different. After about 2 hours of walking around, we had been leaving Hot Topic when I felt like I was being watched. Like we were being watched. I finally caught eye of some guy in sunglasses, a tan shirt, gray jacket, and black dress shoes looking at us from across the center of the mall. The most offsetting thing about him, he was clean-cut, clean-shaven, short black hair. Everything about him screamed official, but his clothes looked like he had grabbed them off the floor and tossed them on. At first I thought he was a cop in regular attire and that I had once again been falsely accused of stealing. Little background, the owner of the mall's Walden Books had taken a strong disliking to me after I accidentally busted their theft sensors 2 years prior by falling over onto one stupidly distracted talking to another person. But he never said anything nor got close to us to try and stop us. I decided I wanted to see what he was really up to and led us up into Sears, and sure enough he followed. I didn't tell Sarah about it, but made a decision. There was a hall to our left for restrooms down by the service bays and waiting room, and a good 12 or so feet ahead was electronics. I asked Sarah to wait for me by electronics while I went to the bathroom. There. Now I'd know for sure as we had passed the hall this would mean I'd have to turn around and walk towards him a bit, then down the hall. His pace slowed a bit when he saw us splitting up. I glared him down as I came his way and then turned down the hall, pretending to look at my phone, using it as a mirror. He clearly looked at me as his head turned, but he continued straight on past the hall. I turned into the bathroom doorway, and as soon as he was beyond view of the hall, I turned around. My turn, I muttered to myself and laughed a bit. I felt like a kid playing spy. I had guessed that this guy might notice me, so I came out of the hall and made my way towards tools. The tools section wasn't separated by any walls, but just by the walkway, giving me a clear view and cover behind toolboxes and shelves. He was following Sarah now, but still keeping a good distance. What annoyed me about this was Sarah never got the feeling of being watched or looked over like I had. In fact, both times she looked at him had only happened as turning to look around the store. Now I needed to know, but I wasn't going to cause a scene, or so I thought. I walked over from tools. Sarah saw me coming and joined me. We went back into the mall and then headed for a mall exit. Sarah had started to ask me why we weren't heading towards our cars, but a simple hand motion from me cut the question out. We walked outside. He was a considerable bit behind us, so I rushed us through the 2 sets of doors, giving them time to close. He walked to the edge of the overhang and stopped. I explained everything while pretending to look for cars, then turned around. In the area behind the doors, there he stood, and now he had no way to avoid both of us seeing him directly. We walked back in, and he had turned, standing against the sidewall. I now stood in front of him. "What's up, Chief?" I asked, mocking a cop, not a smart idea. But if he was a cop or even mall security, then he'd now have to call me out. He wouldn't look directly at either of us. "Gonna say I stole something? I've been minding my own business, how about you mind yours?" I was now projecting at him, but he said nothing, and even having raised my arms at him, he didn't move and didn't look at either of us. I opened the next door and waved Sarah through, stopping the door almost touching his face. Sarah had hurried on ahead. I stepped through, and the next few seconds remained frozen in my mind. He sighed, almost as if relieved I hadn't hit him with the door. I walked in and took a slow pace. Sure enough, he followed. However, he hadn't noticed that I was now walking backwards. I backed right into him, and my upper arm caught the feeling of a holster under his arm as we bumped into each other. In Maryland at the time, concealed carry by civilians wasn't legal. I now knew something was entirely out of place. I was angry, but I was also lucky as mall security rounded the corner to exit. "Gun! He's got a gun!" I yelled. He backed away from me as mall security came running up with a taser drawn. "She's lucky you're so annoying," he muttered as he continued back towards the exit and mall security followed. I didn't stick around to find out anything. I ran for Sarah, grabbed her wrists, and took off through the mall towards the security office. The head of security in the office was not exactly thrilled to see me, but was aware of what had gone on. Apparently they had been watching since we entered Sears, and the tape showed them that this man had been following Sarah since she parked, and had actually only started to try to hide himself when she met up with me. The most unreal part of all of this, though, they caught him but released him when he produced an official government ID and number. To me, I don't care if he was God himself. This isn't the type of behavior you just let slide. Hey friends, thanks for listening. Be sure to subscribe and click that notification bell to be alerted of all future narrations. If you got a story, be sure to submit them to my subreddit, r/LetsReadOfficial, and give and receive feedback from the community, and maybe even hear your story featured on the next video. And join my Discord to interact with me and other listeners directly. And if you want to support me even more, grab early access to all future narrations for just $1 a month on Patreon, and maybe even pick up some Let's Read merch on Spreadshirt. And check out the Let's Read podcast, where you can hear all of these stories in long compilation form and save huge on data, located on both Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Links in the bio. Thanks so much, friends, and I'll see you again soon.